tonight's webinar on a parent's guide to learning in the classroom on literacy for grade 9 to grade 12. Tonight, our keynote speaker is Professor David Booth, and our in-house literacy consultant is Michael Hamill. And we are very pleased to have them both here tonight, so thank you very much for joining us. And I will let our keynote speaker start. Thank you.
Let's take that little, here it is. Good evening. This is an exciting evening when educators and parents get together to talk about children, young people, and literacy. So I've got some slides here I'll use. We have to redefine literacy first. And in the past, it was simply reading your school textbook, getting the test 60 or higher, and that meant you were literate. But today, literacy is much more complicated. We have all kinds of resources now, text forms that we read, that we have to read, that we might want to read, from handheld tablets to phones to books to magazines to all kinds of advertising. We are surrounded by print and visuals, and our job is to help kids make sense of all that, so it's a brand new world. So then there are new literacies, and they're generally called technology. But the real big push for this is that we value the child's culture and the child's home and the child's background. That's the big new literacies. So I've got several down here, and I've got really pretty colors to show you I know how to do that. And Michael will talk more about those, but the bottom one is the big one for me. Different text forms, from a form you fill out to a classic novel you have to read because it's on the test, to a song lyric you've just created for yourself and your group with your guitar, to a translated poem you're reading from French. The whole world is huge, and that's what we realize. If we prepare our kids for different text forms, they are more literate. So books aren't dead, of course. They're online, they're in smaller formats, and there are so many talking books now that you all have iPods, or you have those radio things you can hear when you want. And TV now, you hear when you want, and you watch TV on every kind of device there is. The big TV is pretty well gone. I love the title of this book because Mark Pretsky is a very big shot with video games and computer games. And he says, "Don't bother me, Mom, I'm learning." And so many parents of kids in high school are so nervous about the time spent online and the time spent gaming. My son is 35, he's a gamer, so I had to be careful what I say. But the whole point of that is the amazing intellectual ability of gaming. Now, whether that's print strong or not, it's a whole other story, because we want our kids to be thoughtful, critical, creative readers and writers and constructors of media, but we also want them to have print power. So the brain is the big new world for teaching. We're looking at how the brain makes sense of print, of text, of shape, of form, of graphic. And we have to now realize that when we're teaching our kids, we're after not that book they're reading, but what that book means in their head, in their mind, in their soul. We're after something bigger than the print on the page. For a long time, we thought you had to get the meaning off the page. And now we know that kids are bringing their homes, their cultures to the page. So I like Stephen Johnson's how popular culture is demeaned by so many people, and yet that's what we live on. We go to the grocery store, we read all those magazines as we're standing here. We read them with speed reading about Brad and whoever. And we have to realize that let's not knock pop culture. Let's say that's what it is. And this is what this is. And this is what this is. And suddenly there's room for all of it. There's room for spiritual literacy. There's room for economic literacy. All the things we can find out about is what literacy really means. So this is a friend of mine wrote this book. He's a professor in Brock. And it was a shocking book 10 years ago when it came out, because we were just at that point of hating them. This is a picture, you've got to guess the country. That's right, Bangladesh. And my grad student, Arif, his doctoral program was on teaching the villagers of Bangladesh to read in their own language, Bangla, using the cell phone. He bought 16 men and 2 women the cell phone, and they could keep it if they could read and text message him within 2 years. Here's the story. Everybody did it. So these are lemon and fruit pushers with their carts. They go to market every day. See those guys? They can all read with the cell phone. So I don't want anyone to knock the medium. It's what you do with what's on the medium or in the medium that's the magic for high school kids. There's a wonderful book by a group of kids in New York who were 16 years old in grade 10, who happened to be black, and they all took a 6-month poetry writing course, and they all changed their lives. And this one lad wrote his book, it was called Paint Me Like I Am. What I tell parents is, this is your child. This is who your child is. You can strengthen, deepen, extend, but don't change your child. Paint him like he is. How can we strengthen that then? How can we surround him with enough tools and resources to make him or her strong? In all my life of teaching, I never used basketball novels, nonfiction, or poems. So this picture is very important to me. I carry it with me always on my websites. Because my son played basketball for 4 years of high school, then hockey. He never once read a story about a basketball player or a poem about basketball. Now there are lots of them. And when Kobe Bryant retired last month, he wrote his retirement speech as a poem. And it was attacked by lots of people. So I was phoned by a reporter to defend it. So I did. More people read that article on basketball than anything I've ever written in my whole life. Here as I am defending a basketball player's choice of writing a poem to retire with. Listen, the world is bigger than we ever thought, and the basketball player matters. Inside and outside reading, and that's what a lot of parents are asking about. What do they do outside school, outside the curriculum, outside the mandatory reading? And I think we have to realize that in school, they're reading all day in high school. They're reading in every subject. They're not going to school from 9 to 4 and not seeing print. So when they come home, they might want us to look at print for the next hour. That makes sense to me. A lot of parents, you do your homework the minute you get home. Well, they've just spent from 9 to 4 doing that. Maybe it's time to play your guitar, to practice your baton twirling, to cook a recipe for your family you read about online. I want a rich world. I actually look at cookbooks online now. I no longer buy them. I can find it faster and better online. But when you do buy a cookbook, what you read is the story of the food, the background of the people, the culture it's from, and suddenly you're enriched. So both matter. Gender issues in high school are very specific because they're beginning to see the differences and to want to combine them. So you have to have things that you understand. Should we have co-ed bathrooms? It's a big decision. At university, we do not have that, but there are dorms that do. So you look and see what is the culture you want, you believe in, but in issues of gender with literacy, there are some strong differences. What I love about things like history, geography, math, those differences don't matter much. We come together. But then there are topics like phys ed, where they might take it together, but there are differences. English, French, where suddenly what we're reading and writing has applications to our identity we're creating, to who we are. So I value the difference and I value the similarities. And we work in school to do both. This is my son on the picture of a book because they needed a cover. And his first girlfriend was there and he wanted to impress her. So there he is. And I want us to realize that hockey players are normal people, that literacy is for everybody. And this is a terrible story I'll tell you. I was crossing the border and the customs officer in America said, "What are you going to do in America?" I said, "I'm going to give a speech on literacy." He said, "Literacy, what's that?" I said, "Well, literacy is reading and writing." "Reading? Only rich people do that." And my heart sank, because I don't want a world where we think literate people are only rich because they can afford the books. I want a world where literacy applies as a way of making meaning about the world. I want a bigger understanding of literacy than just a heavy, rich novel. I love this cartoon. So I have the rough draft all finished, ready to write the paper, and bam, my computer freezes. Lucky for me, my cell phone was handy. "Dude, I didn't know it was possible to text message a 10-page paper. Either that or find a pencil." I love that story, because that's me now. I now go to the computer before I write. Now there are schools that don't allow computers yet. They actually are taking from their children 21st century skills. Do you want to handwrite as well? Sure, if you're taking notes, good idea. Although, my doctor takes notes on a cell phone. So I have to take a look at this whole idea of pens, computers, pencils. I just was given for Christmas a fountain pen. I haven't seen a fountain pen in 50 years. It's beautiful. It's elegant. It's too slow to write with, but it's beautiful. So I think this whole issue is, what are you writing? What are you reading? And don't worry about the capital B. Is it legible? That's what you have to be, legible, or we can't pass you. Find a way to make it legible. Did you get through your summer reading list, Jeremy? Get through as in read? Yes, as in read. Read as in look at every page and comprehend its meaning. Or read as in flip through the first chapter and plan to Google a synopsis the night before school starts. I'm just trying to be clear here. Wow. Well, I'll tell you something. I think it's sometimes a good idea to read the synopsis first. When I read a movie review before I go to the movie, I'm quite happy. When I read a TV guide discussion in the Star on the weekend before I watch the show, I find that helpful. So I'm not adverse to reading before, but should you read the book as well? Well, if you have an activity where each group's involved with preparing a discussion about each chapter, you win. So what you do with what you read, how you construct meaning, is the meaning in high school. I just came from the first year engineering at U of T. Engineering. Gee, we don't think of that as literacy first. You're wrong. You know what their final exam was in groups? They had to create a machine that would better society. They had a huge gym, and all of the engineering students had the machines there. We all toured around to see what the machines could do. One was a wheelchair that could spin on a dime. They had the most amazing things they created. Engineering, creating social justice things. The world is bigger than we ever thought, and it's wonderful. Should boys and girls be taught separately? Some of your schools, Catholic schools, have girls' schools, some have boys' schools. I have no problem with that. What's best for your kid is what I always say. My kid went to a hockey school. Now, do you think I wanted him to go to a hockey school? It's the last thing I wanted. He needed it, and it was perfect for him, and he won the Governor General's Medal. Come on, it was the right decision. It might not be the right decision for your kid, but for that kid it was. So I think you take a look at what does your child need at this time in his life, and are you being honest about it, and are you working with the child to make sure the decision's good? Because literacy matters a lot. And if you're in a school where you're afraid, where there's bullying, you're not going to comment, you're not going to get your ideas out, you're not going to be able to say what you think and change your mind. So I need to be where I can feel trust, where I can be safe. Critical and creative understanding, both are necessary. Critical doesn't mean negative, it means thoughtful. And creative doesn't mean wild, it means your opinion. And I want all this to happen in a class, and it can. I'm looking at the grade 9 class that studied girls in Afghanistan. Could they go to school or not? They read 7 articles downloaded. It was deep articles, hard reading. And then they brought in 2 men who had been in Afghanistan on 2 tours of duty, and they interviewed those men. That's called teaching. It's called learning. It's called making sense of complicated text. It's called a book set of different kinds of sets of text. Looking at articles, dialogue, fiction, learning. Deep understanding, making connections. If a kid can't connect to what he's reading, it's a pretty hard sell. If it's reading about another culture, what in that culture can he connect to? Is it about adolescence? Because there's lots of commonalities for adolescents. Getting the important ideas out. What's the big idea in this book? What's the big idea in this article? What's the big idea in this film? Making inference, understanding that there's between the lines, you find out so much. They come into your home, they check your faces out, and they know if you're in a good mood or not. They know when to ask for the car. They're inferring. It's a great skill. Visualizing. Many kids that can't make a picture in their head of what they're reading can't read it. It's a big new discovery. Some boys have trouble visualizing because the print never connected. When they begin to see what the print means through graphic text or through talking or painting or illustrating after, they're going to make the connection. Synthesizing information. What in here matters to you now? What big stuff have you taken now and going to make sense of it? Was the War of 1812 won by the States or by Canada? Does anybody know? Analyzing what you found. Summarizing what you found, and then having some opinion based on wisdom and thought. I read the New Yorker magazine. It's American, but I read it. And I read it cover to cover, and there are 120,000 people in Canada that read this magazine, and I'm one of them. But my son doesn't read it. He reads music journals. I don't. It means nothing to me. So I want you to allow choice, but to demand it be thoughtful choice, and that they do something with the choice. That's what's important about it. It's not just hit and miss. It's having a reason. Look at this list of magazines that are all online. My son reads everything online. I tend to read everything on print, except recipes. I was in a grade 10 class, and this boy said, "Mr. Booth, before you read that to us, just tell us what you want. What's it mean?" And well, that's the whole point of my being here. I don't know what it means. You must have a manual that tells you. Yeah, but I don't want to read that manual. I want you to tell me what you think it means, and we'll argue it out and figure it out together. That's what processing is all about. If I can send you a ditto or a photocopy with everything on it you have to learn, but that's not what I'm after. I want you to think about it, argue it, wonder. Can you do that? Because that's what the deal is. I also want them in the deep end of the pool. Look how beautiful my blue is with that red. Isn't that good? I did that. I knew you'd like that as a technician. I love the deep end because here's the rule. You can't learn to swim in the shallow end. You got to learn to swim in the deep end. You got to know what swimming is. It's not being able to put your feet down. So when I'm working with kids on a topic like the War of 1812 or whatever it is, I'm going to ask them very complicated questions. They're going to do some research that's really deep and complicated and full of gray areas. And I'm excited that we now in schools have gone so far past the 5 cheap comprehension questions to the big issues that bother you or worry us or the world's wondering about. We really are moving deeply into good questioning, good responding, good activities. It's more fun at the deep end. I want you to realize all the books out there now that are very critical to our world. This particular book, that I can't go back, where it is, there it is about mining, and I want you to just check the character's face and his clothing. You probably in your schools have no one that looks like that. What would you do if you did? How open are your schools? Suffer all the children to come unto me. I want us to look at literature that's about other peoples, other countries, other cultures. Begin to recognize what we have, why we are Canada, and what we owe the world to move it as far ahead as we can. So I'm thrilled that today in our schools we're reading deep, powerful texts. We're seeing films that change who we are and how we thought. We're reading articles by top-notch researchers. We actually are moving our kids into a complete different world where it isn't this book here, it's this world here. And that's what excites me about high school today. When I talk to them, their ideas are expanding by the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Perfect. Hello. Again, my name is Michael Hamlin. I'm a I'm a consultant with the Teaching and Learning Department, this is our third session so far tonight. And what I'm doing here again is I'm actually trying to connect it from K to 12. So David's done a fabulous job tonight dissecting all three age grouped areas, and so I'm just kind of moving it from the K to 12 piece. So here we have what we call our Student Well-Being and Achievement Board Improvement Plan. This is for parents, for students, and for teachers to understand what we are here at Durham Catholic District School Board. If you actually look in the center of our Board Improvement Plan, we have that student, educator, and curriculum. And as I've mentioned in the past sessions, that we look at those three as a bond. So traditionally, we would have seen the educator teaching that curriculum to that student, and then that student kind of bringing it back to the teacher. But now we're looking at this more as a bond. So when you look at this picture, this is, I guess, what you would have seen as a traditional classroom from the 1970s. Again, when you look at some secondary classroom settings, we tend to maybe have them set up where they are in an isolated, siloed type of atmosphere where students are doing work by themselves. They have to hand them in to their teacher. A lot of it was maybe product-based. But we're doing really, really good shifting along that whole line of moving from that whole notion of this is what it used to be to this is what we're seeing this now. And in that grade 9 to 12 model, there's a lot of movement in this as well. And so the idea behind this is that these students here are collaborating with each other. They're learning from each other, that they're not just siloed and sitting at their desks independently or isolated doing their work. What we see is that students are learning from one another. And so what that promotes is a learning environment that supports that student learning, that also supports other students' learning. And it's amazing to see the evolution of that happening. And so when we see that idea, we look at what we call the third teacher. And so when you look at that third teacher idea, that concept is that we have what we refer to as three teachers. So that first teacher would actually be the traditional teacher, or even the adult, the parent. So any type of parent that you would have, or any adult that a child would have a connection to. That second teacher, which is so important, is that peer learner. So again, those friends, but that peer-to-peer learning is so unbelievably important. And then that third teacher is the idea of the physical and social environment. And so again, we're making a shift in actually looking at that environment as an actual teacher. And so the common theme that we've had from kindergarten, and now we're moving all the way up to grade 12, is that importance of countable talk. As students come into our system in kindergarten, these are 4 elements that we focus on, and this moves all the way up to high school, up to grade 12. And so the other message that we've been sending out tonight as well is that these conversations need to extend into the home as well, that they shouldn't just sit isolated within a classroom setting. And so that whole idea of making connections is connecting yourself to a text or even to a situation, to a literacy situation, and understanding what it means to you or what it reminds you of. That whole understanding of questioning, so you're allowed to question things that you're seeing. You don't have to take it for face value. Then the idea of listening to others, so seeing what other people are having to say and learning from what they're saying, and then shifting towards what that person said to you actually maybe has changed what your opinion was of this particular text. And so this was a question that we posed earlier as well, again connecting us strongly to the Durham region. But if you were to use those 4 elements and then connect it to a question like how might the 407 impact the Durham region, you could probably see yourself quickly getting engaged with that. And that's a question that you could easily have a very deep conversation with your child around that as well, be it the positive or negative impacts that are related to the 407, even when you're thinking about environmental impacts, or I guess modern day convenience. It's an interesting concept that's happening in the Durham region, not just with the 407, but you can even move into the development of Durham. And I mean, what did it look like 10, 15 years ago, and comparing it to it now. Also, another question we posed earlier was around how might an international airport in Pickering impact the Durham region. Again, that's another impactful piece. But what a high-level thinking question that you could pose with your child around the impact of our local community. And then this third question we posed in here as well is, should the Canadian government provide a $1,000 incentive for every Canadian to take a tropical vacation? It's interesting, the reason why I put this one in is because I actually work with the outdoor education team at one of our high schools in St. Mary's, and we had this amazing in-service where we did so much learning around even some of the things that I'm talking to you about today. Actually, one of the things was the third teacher that I talked earlier. And so what we did is we actually created a curiosity wall, and we put this piece of paper up, termed it Curiosity Wall, and then allowed them to ask or tag any questions relating to outdoor education. But one question that came up was, why is school so stressful? And so that was a really interesting conversation. It's something that we still linger out there. And the conversation we extended into is like, so you think of the 4 walls of your school as connected with stress, and so it's interesting that that's what you connect it with. And so what are some things that we could possibly do to solve that particular problem? And so that's why a question like this kind of came up. But it's still a lingering question that we have over our group, that there may be this stigma towards high school as being a place of stress, where that kind of upset me, I guess, because I think that when I think of going to school, it shouldn't necessarily be connected with stress, but it should be connected with many other things. But then it also lent us down the question, or down the road of like, what do you think stress is? And so, because they connected outdoor education as being this, this stress-free experience, but it was interesting because myself and the teacher that was next to me, we happened to go on this major trek about 10 kilometers into the bush, and 10 kilometers back out, well, we weren't 10 kilometers out, we were only about 90 meters out. This particular friend who happened to be with me sprained his ankle, and it was not a stress-free experience trying to hike out of the bush. So it extended our conversations, but again, just someone posing that question and the accountable talk that we were allowed to have with that. But it's something that really brought about the stigma of high school and this connection to stress, which was really interesting. And so that kind of question got thrown out there on this one right here. But yeah, it just kind of, it creates more questions, could create more questions, could create more questions. And so this is something that we've been using within the system, and it's something that you can take home with you. It's called the question matrix. Some students refer to it as creating like thicker or thinner questions. And the idea behind it is to create those more higher order thinking questions. And It also is encouraged to engage your child with the text that they're particularly interested in. And again, as David was pointing out too, when we're thinking of text, it's not necessarily just reading text. There's so many different types of texts that are out there via posters, videos, Instagram. There's so many different things that are out there. Twitter. It's unbelievable what our students are exposed to and how well how well versed they are in using them. And instead of hiding from it, it's actually something that we want to encourage and actually engage into that whole higher order critical thinking piece. And so there's a couple quotes here that I just want to show you. So this one here, we speak not only to be understood, but to understand. Language is the exposed edge of thought. And it's interesting. I just want to go back to this outdoor education team in that high school in St. Mary's. They had so many conversations around how they feel that they are using technology too much, that it's too much in their face, and that there's time for it to be put away. And I agree with that, and I also disagree with that in a sense that we want to have a balance. Like, we are going to have technology, and I think that it's got its time and place, and there is a time and place for it to be put away as well. And so it's just a matter of knowing when we should and when we shouldn't use technology. But again, that was another interesting and amazing conversation that we had along that idea. We don't want to just throw things out or ban things, but we want to definitely find that balance between new elements, because there's going to be new technologies that are going to be coming out, and we need to know how we want to approach them when that does happen. So again, I love this quote as well. I didn't know what I knew until I talked about it, and that was from a grade 7 student. But again, it goes back to that whole accountable talk piece, where listening to someone else speak or listening to yourself speak to someone else can help extend your learning, help extend your thinking, and help extend other students' thinking and learning as well. And again, when we traditionally think of literacy, especially and I know, especially with our standardized literacy test as well, a lot of times we really shift towards that reading and writing, but we definitely want to encompass all three elements of that oral language as well. So I just like this whole quote of reading and writing float on the sea of talk. So really valuing the importance of conversation and talk and listening. And so here are some other questions that you can tag along and have in your back pocket as well. But whenever experiencing a situation with your child or looking at a particular text, these are great questions that can help extend that conversation. Because I know with some adolescents, it can be a challenge at times to have those conversations. But again, it's extremely important that we're constantly communicating with our adolescents, and that we are here to try and develop and enhance and nurture a higher order critical thinking culture. And so I showed this earlier today along the whole importance of schema. When we think about the primary grades, we really focus on that whole element of schema, the importance of how schema and inferencing support each other. If you're going to infer or find clues in a text, you're going to need to have some background knowledge. It also, again, it supports your point of view of a particular text. So when you think of, making connections or schema or inferencing and that point of view, they all work together. They're not siloed, but they all support one another in order for you to make a particular judgment call on a particular text. And so we also showed this one earlier as well, which connects into the junior curriculum, along the whole idea of whose voice and opinion is missing from a text. And it's interesting, in the Canadian Coat of Arms, an interesting question that you can kind of pose to that. Again, seeing maybe where your bias would come from, and then looking at that text, and then seeing what you're thinking. But the next one it then can also extend into is a picture such as this one. And so when you think of that question right there, what is your initial reaction to this text? As we move through with our literacy skills, we develop the whole idea again of that schema, our background knowledge, our prior knowledge. We also make inferences. So you're probably making inferences right now as to what you're seeing. You're probably making a judgment call and you might be, and you probably already have an opinion about this particular text. But what's interesting is that this is just one picture, and the conversations that you can generate from this, because when we start moving into that whole higher order thinking, or higher order critical thinking piece, especially the critical thinking piece, you're making a judgment call, and it's not necessarily a negative one or a positive one, as David was mentioning earlier, but you are making a judgment call on a particular picture. So I've shown this image to students, in the junior grades all the way up to grade 12, and it's interesting the conversations that we've had with this. I think the most interesting one that I've had with this, though, and it was in a high school setting, is that, first of all, the person posed the question, like, why do we even have fighting in hockey? And it's interesting that fighting in this past year has actually kind of dwindled out. But I also thought it was interesting to show it because it almost gets eliminated during the hockey playoffs, and we're in that playoff season right now where fighting is almost non-existent. But that same conversation extended into, how are these people not suspended when they fight? Because in other sports around the world, that's what happens. And then it extended into, wait a second, our two national sports are hockey and lacrosse. And for some reason, both of these sports allow you to fight. You just get a 5-minute penalty, but you get to come back out again and play. Whereas there's not many sports out there that actually, or team sports, I should say, that allow for that. So again, it's just it's something that generates a question, that can generate a question, that can generate a question. And so at the end of it, you'll still have people saying, like, so why do we have fighting in hockey? And you'll have people who will be on both sides. Don Cherry, if he was here, would have his one opinion, and then other people would have their opinions as well. But again, what this is doing, it's a picture that's trying to spark something. It's trying to spark a flame that then ignites, and then it creates an interesting conversation. But again, it supports that whole idea of accountable talk. But then when we're moving into the whole adolescent piece, we're really focusing in on that whole judgment element. So you understanding how would you approach a text like this. So you want to look at multiple points of view. You want to see if there's people's voices that are missing, and then that's how you would approach a text. You wouldn't just take it necessarily for face value. So with that, David and I are here for any more questions if we have any.
Thank you very much, guys. I want to start off with a positive question. Ooh. So my student, or my child, I should say, really enjoys English. This is one of their favorite subjects. What can I do to help bring them along in their grades 9 through 12 experience?
Well, are they not doing well?
I think in the context of this is a child that is doing well, but the parent wants to make sure that they're able to continue to encourage that growth and be part of that child's growth. So not just saying, here, go to school, things will go fine.
Well, I sort of think go to school, things will be fine, but aside from that, if a kid's doing well, I wouldn't interfere. But I think that listening, as Michael has said, listening to that child, talking with conversations about what they're reading, writing, talking. Read what they write as readers, not as evaluators. Be impressed by what they're doing, the work they're sharing and showing. Support them. My rule would be, do what a grandmother would do, which is say good things about what they've done. And I really think that parents, I need them not to be an additional critical voice when the kid comes home, but to be some kind of hockey coach. Hockey coaches are pretty smart. My kid had a lot of them. And I watch how they change the kid's ability. They work in neat ways. They find the specific thing to help with, rather than saying you're the stupidest person out there. So I think that with parents, listening a lot, supporting, driving to the library if they have to go, make sure they have the time to become involved in other activities, like cooperative learning and social activities. Make sure they can have a good supportive network in their community, so they're giving maybe to the food bank or whatever. What are they doing to make them healthy, wise people where print is normal in their lives?
Excellent. Now, so moving from the future English professor to the future engineer, my student or my child is heading down a track towards more of the science, more of the math side of things, but wants to go to university. Are there any particular courses they should be thinking about on the Durham Catholic Board that would help mold them in that direction and still keep them on the right track?
Yeah, I think when you are going down a science, if you are going down that road of a science and math road, it's interesting how we maybe pigeonhole some things like that. I think it's important that you have a balance of learning, in that you don't necessarily pigeonhole yourself through like, I'm going to be a science and math person. I think that there's so many different things that are being offered in our high schools around the arts, around languages, that you want to definitely embrace as much as you possibly can. Now, from a parent's perspective, though, again, even if your child is going down that particular route, what we were talking about here tonight is something that you would want to definitely impose in your home as well, right? Around that whole engaging of accountable talk, that whole idea of looking at a variety of different texts and bringing those home to that adolescent, because it's interesting how we can move as a system, that especially when we hit grade 8 and grade 9, we move into a whole new structure, and these things that we've been doing all along, that you've been nurturing your child with, don't stop at grade 8. Like, you can still definitely bring those in, right? And so it's important that we encompass and embrace all those great things that you've been doing as a parent, and don't necessarily stop them in grade 8.
Remember those engineers who did those projects first year were on social justice and helping the community. So that's broader than just math. But you have to have math to get into that program. So you look, as you said, at the balance of all of it. You want to be a good person, not just an engineer.
Absolutely. It's absolutely true. I mean, no matter what your career is, you're going to be reading, and you'll probably be writing too, in some capacity.
And vice versa, numeracy is there as well, right? So you want to embrace both of them as how they both really support each other, right?
Absolutely.
And not silo them.
By the way, by that first question, the kid doing well in English, got to buy her a laptop.
Gotta buy her laptop.
Need her writing,
What do you recommend, David?
cheapest one going.
So, as parents, sometimes, and this can happen at any grade level, but I imagine it's more acute at the high school level. Your kid is learning at a level that is beyond your comprehension. How do you be part of that? How do you contribute to that in a meaningful way, or can you contribute to that in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think you can say, I just was on a PhD exam with a chemistry teacher. Physics. And her whole program is physics as social justice. She uses the newspapers, the contemporary news, to know how physics works in all these areas. So what you can do with your child is say, tell me about it, make some connections for me. How is what you're learning in that history of ancient Rome applying to the raptors? Is it the same? Are they in a Colosseum in Rome? They sound like they are. Are they? I think you connect to today, and that constant connection. Help me understand that. I don't need to know the math. I need to know why you're doing, what you think the implication of that is. What in our world is that going to help with? How are you going to use that? Sounds exciting. Tell me a bit about it.
Absolutely, and I'll just, and to extend into that too, is that as a parent, you want to try and find maybe your entry point there. And in a teaching profession too, and we've moved, and if we look back at that instructional core where we are co-learners, so there's times where I'm learning from students, and so there's times where I'm learning from my children as a parent as well. And so when you have that co-relationship, it actually really strengthens that whole educational relationship between a parent and their child as well. So it's just trying to find your entry point where extend your conversations, maybe via this way as opposed to this way.
I think that stress thing you talked about was that stress wall just amazed me, because if you can't get the math at your homework and I can't help you, I'm going to talk to you about what's stressing you out with this. What's the biggest issue here you have, and how can we get some help online about that? And there are homework hotlines you can phone. Let me help you with that stress rather than the math.
And speaking of homework hotlines, I think we actually have access to that through the DCPIC website, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
If you go to dcpic.ca, you can find
Good.
some great resources there for
Good.
that.
Excellent.
That'll run through the board, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yep.
My last question that I was going to throw out there, and I haven't seen any more come in online, was maybe the complete opposite of our first question. So we have a student, they're falling behind. At what point do you try and steer them towards an easier academic route on the English side? And at what point do you try and lift them up and keep them at that?
It's such a hard question.
Yeah.
My answer is always tomorrow. We don't have to do it today, we can do it. There are online courses now at every subject for every high school, and university has all kinds of supportive things happening now. So I'm not as concerned as I used to be about that. So I'm going to take an easy math course. I need to know I can retake that. And if I can't, there's a problem in that school board. Because if I can't do it now, it doesn't mean I won't be able to do it later. So maybe my stage of development isn't there yet, but it may be. I want all doors open. I have stories I can tell you about hundreds of people who have come back to school at 28, 32, 41. Maybe I'm one of them. And we need to know that it's not over yet.
And I think that actually was going to say was the power of yet, is that you maybe are not there yet, and that's, and so as a system too, we've really been focusing along that whole idea of growth mindset. And so when you're venturing maybe down that road of I can't do this anymore, it could be a case of a fixed mindset. And so how do we foster that whole idea or the idea of a growth mindset, and that you're not there right now, but you're just not you're not there yet, right? And so
Do we have to have a math party on Saturday afternoon with 5 kids in our home? That's a good thing to do, where we help each other grow.
So while I hand it over to Linda, I'll leave you guys with one question to think about, or maybe chew on. How important is a parent's attitude about literacy at this age?
As long as you keep literacy in the biggest definition of making meaning with as many text forms as you can, it's okay. He might not Dad may never read a novel. He might read so thoroughly National Geographic that he's got more knowledge than I have. So I want the literacy broad in definition.
yeah,
Guys, thanks. I'm going to pass it over to Linda now to give the official conclusion.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and I want to especially thank Professor David Booth and also Michael Hamill for joining us tonight and giving your strategies and your wonderful insight. So thank you very much for sharing everything tonight. And I also wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight and participating. So thank you very much in taking part of our webinar. This has been a wonderful experience for us at Durham Catholic Parent Involvement Committee. So thank you, and I hope you had a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you next time. Have a good evening.